the Spotlight on. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. Today the spotlight is on Phil Messier. Phil is an accomplished musician and serial entrepreneur based in Montreal, Quebec. He is currently co-founder and VP of Product and Partnerships at Bopper, where he brings together ad industry people and the artists they love through a platform featuring the best selection of fully cleared independent music that can be licensed instantly for all types of branded campaigns. Phil has created a unique life for himself in music, and through his businesses, he does the same for many others. Please enjoy our conversation.
Lawrence.
Phil, how are you, sir?
I'm great. Yourself?
I'm doing all right, thank you. Thanks so much for making time.
My pleasure.
Where are you, sir?
I'm in a living room in Montreal, Canada.
What a beautiful town. What a beautiful city. I love Montreal.
You've been here? Yeah, I love it here. The more I travel, the more I love it here.
Yeah, I think that's very fair to say. So what's the, tell me a little bit about the situation in Montreal these days. How are things? How's the climate? How are people doing?
You know, it's not easy for anyone anywhere in the world, but I don't know. I guess I feel these days we're kind of grateful for every day of stability, you know? And we have quite a bit of that here, despite all the debate, despite all the politics and all that. Like, people seem to have like a good handle over things. People are somewhat patient, you know, with back and forth, policies changing, incoherences, you know. So it's not so bad, you know. I can't say it's perfect, you know, nowhere's perfect, but it's not so bad. And it looks like, even though this could continue for a while, it doesn't seem like things have to get back to normal or it's total chaos, you know. It seems we can sustain this again for a while more. And I'm saying that with all like my heart going to the artists and the staff on the tours that are getting canceled. I was just on the phone yesterday with a buddy of mine, and more shows were canceled. So all of that stuff is really hard to hear, but so that's the rough part in our industry. But aside from that, I don't know. I'm knocking on wood. It's not so bad just yet.
Yeah. And is Montreal still, are you locked down? Like, what's the, you know, how is it in public? What's the vibe?
So the way it works is like we have like these zones, like red zones and orange zones and green zones. And depending on the rate of new cases, we go back from yellow to orange, from orange to red. So these days, Montreal is in a red zone. So we're all hoping that, so until the end of the month of October, so we're all hoping that if we do well, we'll go back to orange, and then maybe if we do well until Christmas, we'll go back to yellow. But you know, the data's like, this changes as new data is coming in, and so we're all doing our best, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. Well, are you from Montreal originally? Where are you from?
Yeah, I'm from here originally. Yeah.
And you grew up in the city?
In the city, like it's in the city, but it's a bit of a suburb. But yeah, like suburban life with a metro station, subway station. So yeah, I could say city.
Yeah. And what were you as a kid? Were you a music person? Were you a tech geek? You know, what was your path in that?
Yeah, that's a bit of both, to be honest. Like I and both were like really developed in parallel. Like I came in music. I wasn't one of these kids that, you know, was taught violin or whatever at age 5. So it was really during adolescence, like listening to bands that I liked. I was really into punk at the time. And when techno came out, like I'm talking about the like early 90s, like we were getting these records from Europe and Chicago, and so I was really into that as well. So it was kind of a mixed bag. Like I was into punk, I was a sax player, and I really was into techno at some point. So So it was a very weird mix that got me in trouble at music school because
And
people weren't, it's like I was at like jazz school, like heavily like Berkeley influenced jazz school, and like electronic music at the time, like we're talking early 90s, it wasn't cool, you know. It was like these days we take that for granted, and electronic music is obviously everywhere and percolated in pretty much every genre of music. But at the time it was like rock and roll was the thing, and the acoustic genres were the thing, and being in a jazz dominated school, and even mentioning an interest in I was into sampling, you know, and things like that. And at the time it was not great, you know. It was a bit too nerdy for the time, but that's what I was into, you know. I was into like the early Beastie Boys, the techno records. That way, it was all about like, okay, who is pushing the boundaries out there and doing new stuff, and if you've been in music school, like music schools are typically kind of conservative.
yeah,
Even the jazz schools, you know, that were in a sense a reaction to the traditional way classical music was taught in music school. Even those tend to be a bit dogmatic and traditional in a way. So yeah, my interest in sampling and electronic music didn't fit really well over there.
yeah. That's an interesting point you make about the traditionalism in music schools, because I think it's something that people who aren't familiar with those cultures would be surprised to find, especially from a jazz sort of conservatory point of view.
Indeed, I very much agree. Like people don't, yeah, if you're not going through these schools or close to these people, you don't realize how rigid and traditional these are. And I'm actually like, I don't know if you get the same ads I'm getting these days of all these new music teaching services that are out there, like based on mobile devices like iPads and phones and all that. And to me, that's such an exciting space. Like I'm not involved in that at all. Like I don't really use these tools, but I find these guys are taking such a refreshing approach to music learning and teaching. That's complete, like that just like did like completely a blank slate with everything we were taught, you know, and that approach music teaching from much more, I would say, like I don't know, I see like investment in quality of life and community, and sometimes there's like a social aspect to it, and just like the good fun of playing music, you know, and improving and working on it, and all these things, which was not the dominant approach back when I was at school.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. When I was a kid, I took piano lessons at a very early age, and it was a very sort of stereotypical experience. You know, a kind of slightly mean woman who, man, sort of I dreaded practicing. It was never fun, and certainly for the first year, never really played the piano. You know, it was about drawing notes in the book. And reading theory. And as a little kid, it was so non-engaging. And I contrast that with my son. He started taking lessons about 10 years ago, and his music school was the complete opposite. It was all geared towards getting the kids to play. Good. So, you know, sit them in front of the keyboard and peck out a melody very quickly.
I love that.
And when it was time to teach them about rhythm, they sat them in front of a drum, and, you know, just very hands-on about playing. But I thought the thing I loved the most was when they did their, you know, they didn't call them recitals, they called them gigs. And so the kids would take, you know, each semester and learn a couple of songs. But then at the gig, the teachers formed the house band, and the kids would front the band to play their songs.
I'm so happy to hear that, because I'm not like really in contact with these schools anymore these days, and I'm so happy to hear that change is making its way, because, like as we were saying, like even at jazz school, which was supposed to be a reaction, it got very caught up in its own rigidity, and so yeah, that's good to hear.
Yeah, and the difference with playing in front of people with a drummer behind you versus sitting at a piano alone,
Of course.
so exciting.
Yeah.
How did you come to pick up the horn? Why the sax?
Oh man, you would like it's I don't know if people have good reasons to pick up an instrument. Mine was really bad. Like as I said, I was into punk music, and there was this like French band that we loved, like punk from Paris, which was called Berrurier Noir, which I'm sure your listeners never heard of. But it was big. Like if you have like a if you have like French listeners, they'll remember that time. But it was a really like revolutionary punk type of band in the 80s. And for some reason, a sax player made its way into that band, and they were these like amazing sax hooks in there that just really drove the song. And both of my brothers were guitar players, so I couldn't pick up guitars. They were older brothers, and it was just like, I have to find something else. I can't just do everything they're doing. So I had to find something else, and there was those like great sax lines. So there was like this beat up horn at school and a harmony class that I took. So I just took the horn and ran with it, and continued for the love of playing music, playing with people. Eventually got into jazz, but really like, I don't know, without no big purpose, I would say. It was just like discovering music, enjoying it. But I'm not from like a jazz family. I met, like, of course, and I played with all these people with like amazing jazz families and education and all that. For me, it was more of a following, like interest, like immediate interest, going from one thing to the next. And it's really when I got into electronic music that I felt there was something for me there. Even though I continued to play the horn for quite a while, it's really into electronic music that I kind of first found my voice, if I can say that.
Yeah.
Even though I don't consider myself like a great producer, composer, or anything like that, but it's part of obviously my journey. That's how I got into music. The is somewhat typical journey from like player, composer, producer, and eventually full-on entrepreneur, which is the hat I've been wearing for many years now. But
yeah. Well, let me take one more or two detours before we get to the business or the transition into the business world. Let me ask. I do recognize that there's there's more of a tradition, I think, than people might otherwise realize of saxophones and horn players in sort of heavy music. I think, John Zorn is sort of an obvious example, but Peter Brotzman, guys like that. Did you have a pantheon of sax players that were sort of your guys?
Well, of course I was into like the classics, Coltrane and these guys. Well, today my guy is Hank Mobley. Okay.
Oh, sure.
That's my
so you
guy.
got a little more traditional. You got a little more.
That's it. I went I explored, and I was heavily into John Zorn for a time, heavily into Coltrane. It's the first time I hear someone making a parallel between like horn players and heavy music, but it's true. It's definitely out there, and there's a bunch of examples of that, and I find that interesting. But yeah, so my guy is Hank Mobley. And that's it. Like, for me, jazz, like, it peaked in that era, and not that I don't have, like, I'm fine with jazz today, and I enjoy jazz as much as the next guy. But like everything that I was into after that period, which I guess is like hard bop is what it would be called. To me, it peaked there. And that's a very personal perspective. Like, every guy would have his guy or girl would have his opinion, but to me, that's the pinnacle of sax playing is Hank Mobley in that period where like melody, like improvised melody on the spot, on very tonal, familiar chord structures were the thing, just before it broke off into very experimental stuff. And it's funny because on other sides of music interests. I mean, way more experimental stuff. But for jazz, I don't know. I just stopped there.
Yeah, that's funny. I'm sort of a big McCoy Tyner fan,
Okay.
and so he has definitely some overlap. I think he's on a couple of Hank Mobley records.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting you point out that era, because Coltrane's kind of, you know, my guy as well, and I love the sort of 61 when he was playing with Eric Dolphy, like right before he got out there, but he was just sort of leaving the station, you know?
Those exactly, just when he was leaving the station. I love that. And those are the records that I still play today, like the Miles Davis Quintet records, just before that, all that period where his sound was like really mature, but before he broke off into weird stuff. And again, like, much respect for the weird stuff and the experimentation. I make no judgment on that at all. It's just that these records that I tend to listen to these days are these ones where it was still somewhat at the station.
Yeah. So in terms of where jazz and electronic music meets these days, are you up on people like Donnie McCaslin and things like that?
Not so much, to be honest. I don't follow that. No, I'm not really up to speed. Like, actually, any names that I would tell you that I would mention would tell you that I'm not up to speed on what's being done.
What are you primarily listening to? Are you more on the electronic side, or like what gets a spin on a good day for you?
Oh man, it's new Lost City Ramblers these days. And
oh, nice.
Yeah. So yeah, well, yeah, I just, like, when the pandemic hit, like, first, like, phase or whatever in March, I ordered a banjo online, and I just got into this, like, rabbit hole of, like, banjo, like, and not bluegrass that much, but really old time Appalachian banjo. The playing, the tunes, the performers, the instruments, all of that, I've been heavily into that. I don't know if it's signs of me and other people looking for a simpler life or whatever it
I was thinking melancholy. Deep melancholy.
I don't know. Maybe that's it. But honestly, it's keeping me very focused. You know, I'm heavily into that at nights and in the weekends. I'm loving all of that. So and I like these new. Like I discovered. I don't know how well known she is, but someone like Nora Brown, like, she plays old time banjo, and she's super young, but she obviously was brought up in the like old time Appalachian tradition, but she takes it somewhere else completely, not so much with like electronics and hybridization or things like that, but just the way she approaches the tune, like the way she sings, and obviously, like, growing up hearing all the music we all hear on the radio and all that, you see that in her music, but it's super stripped down, like banjo vocals, super nice voice, and timeless classics. So that kind of combination, I've been discovering these artists, and I'm having a lot of fun. So it's not like the most trendy hip stuff, but it's that's what I like these days.
Yeah. Well, so you went to music school, and did you do a 4-year program? Was it an undergrad program, or?
I did both. Like, I did here we have like it's a very Quebec thing. Like, I think I live in Quebec, which is a province in Canada, and we have our own little school system where between high school and university, you have like a 2-year or 3-year college. So I did music there. So it's like, call it a 3-year college. And then I went to university for like a full-on bachelor's degree in music, which I quit along the way because at the time I was starting my first company when I was in university. So I quit, so I didn't finish the degree, and I went back 10 years later thinking they would lay out the red carpet for me and say, oh, I just fill out this form and we'll give you your degree. And that's not what they did at all. So I went back on the school benches at night. That was a fun experience. Anyway, I digress, but yeah, I did a bunch of years in music school.
And so was the aspiration never really that you were going to be a professional musician, or did you just realize at some point it's not a life that you wanted? Like how did you go from music school to business?
There's a bunch of um, like posts or whatever, like in the path, like important marks in the path. I don't know how to call them. One I remember very vividly is as a young adult, I was working in restaurants. That what I was doing at the time. Like I don't know what age I was, like maybe 21 or something like that. And I remember telling myself, I need to somehow get my stuff together and make a living out of this before I'm 25, and I meant music. Before I'm 25, I'll switch to something else, So I gave myself a horizon, and it wasn't really a conscious thing. It just happened. I was like, I can't be working in restaurants like that to support my music stuff forever. It had like an expiration date, that lifestyle, because at the time I was like playing gigs and all that, and I couldn't pay the bills with that. So I worked in restaurants. So it was real. I really told myself I have until 25 to live of this. Otherwise, I'll do something else. And I'm a curious guy, and I've always been a curious guy. So doing something else for me wasn't like necessarily a failure. It was just, if it doesn't work, I need to do something else. It was very, very simple. And I don't know if it was that fact, but like, I don't think it was like 2 years later, I was living well of what I was doing. Like it was pretty fast at the time. Like during those days, I started like working, creating music with my buddy Paul at the time, was a good friend. And we started making music together with samplers, digital tape machines, and like that kind of stuff. And within 24 months, like we were quitting our jobs, like pretty much.
Wow.
It was pretty fast, and it was an interesting time, because and I'm sure, like, we were in Montreal, and I'm sure it was the same everywhere in the world, where we were transitioning from this era where you created / produced music in studios that, I don't know, they cost like millions of dollars to build, just the build out, traditional studio build outs, and then the equipment, like expensive tape machines and expensive consoles and microphone. All of that stuff was crazy expensive, and almost overnight, and that's a moment that I remember very vividly. We transitioned to digital recording. Okay. So there were steps along the way. Like there was Pro Tools before, there was recording directly on your computer. There was digital tape machines like ADATs and stuff like that were like cheaper than large tape machines and all that. But those are all like within a couple of years. This all happened maybe 5-6 years. And when I say like our music careers kind of started to take off, the moment I remember is that I was literally in line for a computer store to open, to get the first computer on which you could record music natively. And when I say natively, for people not familiar with this, I mean without resorting to hundreds of thousands of dollars of outboard digital equipment. At the time, you could have like a Pro Tools system for $120,000 that replaced all your studio, blah, blah, blah. But it was still completely out of reach of like young dudes like us. But this one computer, I think it was a 7300 Power Mac. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. Like it was, if you were in the know, you knew that you could just plug your freaking cables in the back of the computer and record audio on it. It wasn't great audio. There was crazy latency and all sorts of issues, but you could. if you really wanted to record music directly on the computer. And that's a total game changer, because from that point, we could compete with the big guys. Like we were like 21 and we could produce finished, like quote unquote, finished music on our own without renting studios, without building studios, without buying crazy expensive equipment. So it really became about like creativity. The fight, like over like a very short number of years, the sort of fight changed. Like 3 years before, the fight was like, do you have enough expensive equipment to actually produce that recording? And 3 years later, it was, who's the most creative guy, you know, that can handle digital technology? Because at the time, again, like I was at music school, people didn't care about that stuff. I was one of the 3 guys who was like in the whole freaking faculty who were even interested in that stuff, you know?
Yeah.
So I was in line to get that computer. I could record that stuff. So we could go, and I'm sort of like transitioning to like the career and business side of things smoothly. But what happened?
I'm with you. I'm taking the ride with you.
not that I want to. I'm fine with talking about music. And by the way, it's super fun. But what happened is that, so yeah, in line for the computer, buying the computer, set up this like makeshift studio. We're able to produce music out of my mother's basement at the time. And suddenly we can go and see these well-established creatives in advertising agencies. And I'll make another side note here that's very important about the way we got into this, is that these guys at ad agencies that we ended up working with, like these guys ended up being my clients for the 15 years that followed. These guys were like usually our age or just a bit older. They listen to the same music, they attend the same parties, they read the same magazines and all that stuff. So culturally, like we were part of the same generation movement and all that stuff. So we were able at the time to go and see these guys that had the same sort of vibe, if you will, and say we're able to produce music that you'll actually dig and understand. And at the time, the alternative for them was to work with big studios that could do the work, that could turn in the music in time according to the broadcast specs and all these like very complicated things. But these guys were like 20 years older. They didn't attend the same parties. They didn't listen to the same music. These creatives would mention, I don't know, at the time, maybe the Beastie Boys or whatever it is, Massive Attack, and all these bands they were listening to, and they had no idea what they were talking about. So suddenly, these guys we connected with, we were pretty much the only guys that were able to produce music in town on time, according to the specs, blah, 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 with finished masters and all that. But music that actually connected with these guys, that was like culturally relevant, if you will, for these guys. And that, like, I want to say we were like so smart to be there at the time, blah, 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 blah. And I guess maybe there's the part of it that's true, but also a big factor in that is that we were in that very, very, very first phase of people who were leveraging cheap computer technology.
Yeah.
And you saw the same thing happen to video later, you know, like just a couple of years, like 10 years later, like video equipment got crazy cheap. That was the Canon 5D, you know, that was the big breakthrough. Filming on DSLR cameras, you know, super nice picture.
Yeah, when you could start to get those Pro-Am cameras in the early 2000s, it was shocking. Like the people that were all of a sudden filmmakers, you know.
That's it.
Yeah.
And then that was like, it felt like it was overnight, you know, a $3,000 camera, and suddenly you're making like crazy good looking pictures.
Yeah.
So
was that the first business, sort of being in production and helping other people, or basically taking this newly affordable technology and building a production business around that? Is that sort of where you were going?
That's exactly what it ended up being, you know, and it's not like we were executing a big master plan at the time. It was, we were doing what we loved, you know. We love technology, we love great music, and we love doing music with our buddies, and we wanted to make a living out of it, you know. So that the business aspect of it is really this understanding that I can't be doing this and working in a restaurant at the same time, you know. So the early years was like getting out of the restaurants. That was the business plan, you know. It worked. So we got out of the restaurants. We did that for pretty much nonstop. Like it's a pretty, I don't know if you want to go there, but the story of this company is simple. Is like, we did music that people liked for agency people that were into culturally relevant, again, is the term that I like for this. And we pushed. So after that, it was expansion to Toronto and eventually to Paris.
Wow.
And yeah, at the end, like we sold that company in 2016. By the way, the company was called Apollo Studios. And when we sold the company, we were like almost 100 people, like music producers, engineers, composers, like actual full-time composers, and that type of people. Over like a bunch were in Montreal, another bunch in Toronto. We had a studio in Paris, offices in New York and Berlin. So it was a pretty big shop. Crazy Nut House, very fun. Man, so, honestly, I look back and I'm realizing now how unique it was, you know, because it was really like 100 people from different cultures all working to produce great music, and the focus was ads, you know. But the thing that, again, to do a bit like we did for music school, if you're not in the ad production business, oftentimes people don't realize, people say, oh, it's ad music, you know, so it's background music, it's not very important. Some of it is true, of course, but a lot of it that people don't see is how the people that actually do that work are determined to do something good and great, and how ridiculously talented are the people that do this work. And that's like, it still amazes me today, because they basically, like, you know how hard it is to live off of music. The guys that end up doing that work are the best of the best of the best in the world. You know, you have the top artists in the world, of course, who make it to an actual artist's career as we typically understand it. But a lot of these people do ad work, and a lot of these people just, for a bunch of reasons, don't make it on the big stage, but are not necessarily less talented. And these guys ended up in these studios, like Apollo Studios, that we call music houses in the jargon. And so around the world, you have these music houses where the best of the best of the best congregate and do music for brands. Of course, there's a purpose, you know, outside of like artistic expression, but still the level of craftsmanship, of talent, of experience is still like super humbling to me. Like, I've met people doing that are just so amazingly good. So that's it. So that's what we did over these 15 years. One, again, like I was mentioning, like posts along the way, or like, I don't know how to call them, not milestones, whatever. You see what I mean, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. One of them was like when we got out of Montreal first, okay? And that's a story that I love, because like we didn't know our way around the world. We know we're from Montreal, we're young, we don't know anything about business. We have this like appetite to do these things, but we don't know how to go about doing them. And what ended up happening, and that again, it's sort of, there wasn't like a huge amount of purpose to it, but that's how we ended up doing things, is that we would go to Toronto, which is a very North American city, right? It's like North American culture, very similar to big US cities. And since we were from Montreal, which for those of you that don't know, Montreal is in Quebec, which is a mostly French-speaking part of Canada. So we would go to Toronto and say, oh, we have like the European touch, because we speak French and we know all the French music and the European, we could claim a sort of legitimacy of being somewhat more European than these guys. And at the time, Europe was cool, you had all the cool, not the British invasion, but the cool rock bands from London at the time, the cool electronic.
Yeah, all the Britpop bands, and then
Britpop,
the trip hop and all that. Yeah,
exactly. So
all the great music.
We could sort of claim a descendance, a connection to that, because from Montreal is slightly more European than any other place in the US or Canada. So that's a claim we could make.
And very diverse population in terms of,
that's it.
You have the Caribbean influence. Like, it's a very, people who aren't familiar with that city I don't think realize just how diverse Montreal is. Yeah.
It is. And it's diverse, and it's culturally very different from most American cities. I can't really compare it. But anyway, so we could sort of claim that European sound, and at the time, like French touch was a big thing. Anyway,
that's right. There was even a moment where like French rappers were kind of a thing.
That's it. Yeah. So we had that like a European sound, and at the exact same time, we were working the Paris market, claiming we had an American sound, which is such a Montreal thing to do when you look back, So it was very genuine, but like faking it at the same time, like with words coming out of both sides of the mouth at the exact same time, but with a certain like authenticity to it, because that's what Montreal is. It's like a feet in North America and or a couple of toes at least in Europe. So that's how we expanded. That's our sort of like a emergent master plan, is just say we're Europeans to Americans and say we're Americans to Europeans. And of course we realized that afterwards, that we were doing that. Like, while you do it, you're just doing what you have to do.
You're just doing the hustle. You're just running the hustle. That's it. Well, I guess two things that become apparent to me. One is that, your point about the craftsmanship in that music. I'm sure you've seen this far more than I have, but in my limited experience, I've observed, whether it's a piece of film, a commercial, a video game, when you lay down the music bed, the visual comes to life in a much different way. Then you add the sound design on top of that, and it takes it to a whole other level. But your comment makes sense that sort of the elite nature of the craftsmen who are working on this stuff takes it from being simply a commercial with music to a commercial with maybe emotional impact, or that is really achieving some other objective. And the music could be the piece that differentiates, sort of the effectiveness of the product. But the other thing is, I think you've drawn the parallel now for me of the rough theme of what your past is and what you're doing now. It wasn't apparent to me from the outside how you wound up working in, and I want you to say it better than I'm going to, but with a product that is essentially bringing well-crafted music to the marketplace in a different way. So could you talk a little bit about now Apollo gets sold, and what's Bopper, and how did you come to that?
Yeah, well, so Bopper was born inside the walls of Apollo Studios, and very quickly, like what happened is that we sold Apollo Studios to Media Group, and at the time, the only thing I didn't want to sell what was called at the time Apollo Music Store, which is now Bopper. So it was born inside Apollo Studios as Apollo Music Store, but it wasn't worth anything. It was just like this thing we were toying with at the time, like half-baked idea with a bunch of songs, a couple of contracts, and a couple of experiments. So I didn't want to sell that because it wasn't worth anything. Plus, it was a project I was very much invested personally into at the time, and for which I saw a very interesting, promising future. And that's what became Bopper. So I sold everything else, held on to what's now Bopper. And what Bopper is basically the problem we were trying to solve, and that we think we have like a potent answer to with Bopper, is how can brands and the people we were working with at the time are the same people we're working with now, how can these people that produce content for brands, so ads or films for brands, whatever it is they're producing for brands, how can these people source music by indie artists? Okay, so it's a very like narrow problem, but I always felt it was an important one, and eventually it grew out of like just the ad business to expand into the film and television worlds for different reasons. But the idea remains the same: is how can people purchase the rights to use music by indie bands on their productions? Which sounds like so simple, you know. You're like, okay, that if you're familiar with the music business a bit, you probably heard that back in the day, artists didn't want their music on commercials after the let's call it, reorganization of the record business. That changed, and artists were much more interested in partnering up with brands and offering their music to brands under certain conditions. But there was a clear openness to do these types of deals. So with that, how is it so inefficient? You know, because before Bopper, if you wanted to have a track for an indie band on your commercial, let's say, I won't like go step by step through the process, but it is a very, very laborious process. Just the finding of the music in itself is a bit of a problem, because we have like music discovery tools with like Spotify and Apple Music and all these things, but they're not made to find music for a particular scene or particular emotion or particular thing we need or would like to express. They're made to consume music in a certain way. And all these tools, and we've used them proficiently to find music for our clients, they're not really helpful. You know, you can do a couple of things with them, but when you're looking for like an old school track that talks about togetherness, that speaks to people between 40 and 50 years old, Spotify doesn't really help, you know. It's part of your arsenal, but it's still very inefficient. So just the finding of that music is a problem in itself, especially if you're looking for maybe like music that's up and coming, which is often a problem we were like something we were asked to find, you know, like, okay, find me an up and coming band that does this or that. So that's even more of a problem, finding that music for an up-and-coming indie band. So just the finding of the music is a nightmare. And I don't want to spend too much time on this because it's a fascinating subject, but it's also a rabbit hole. But like clearing music for these productions it's a nightmare. So there's all sorts of intricacies and all sorts of people involved, all sorts of companies involved, all sorts of legal systems involved. If you go from one place to the next, sometimes the legal system is slightly or vastly different. So clearing those rights, we can't overstate how complicated this can get. So those are the two sides of the problem. So when you're saying like a lot of people, we told ourselves, why can't we buy music online, let's say, and do like Amazon for indie bands? You know, it sounds so simple, like slapping a bunch of tracks on a website and adding a shopping cart and and Bob's your uncle, you know. But that's in reality, it's much more difficult than that, and that's the challenge we undertook at the time. And I'm really happy where we landed. Like we've had a mature product since, I would say, 2019. Before that, it was like a bunch of experiments, iterations, and what we launched as Bopper in 2019 is really what I find, like as a person that's been looking for music for pretty much all of my career, like looking music for productions. To me, that's the best tool out there. And I'm, of course, it's my company and all that. But first and foremost, it's like my sort of obsession with this is building a coherent, usable solution to that problem that we've been thrown at so many times by our clients. So that's what Bopper does. So they're in a nutshell. So that's not.
So it's a two-sided marketplace of brands or agencies looking for thematically appropriate music, and then the creators who are provisioning that music. And in between, are you dealing with curation and screening that music? Are you dealing with a taxonomy for helping the brands find the music? Like what's the problem you have to solve to make the whole thing work?
Yeah. It's a multi-head creature, but it's not technically, like when people say two-sided marketplace, usually they mean, if I'm not mistaken, that it's somewhat open. So people, like eBay is a two-sided marketplace in the sense that people will go on there, like the suppliers will go on there and post their stuff, and buyers will come and buy. But the general understanding is that it's open. In our case, it's not open. So we do screen every bit of music that's on there heavily to avoid too much content. Because one thing, like out of the gates, that we feel is not only important, it's required for this to work. I'm trying to order my ideas here to be clear. One of the requirements for us for this to work is that this needs to be immediate, okay? So that's like basic stuff. It needs to be immediate, so that means that all the rights needs to be cleared in advance. So that means that there's like tons of manual work right there. Like there's a very human layer to it, where we laboriously research every piece of copyright that's attached to every recording that we post on there. So that's a very, very manual labor that's done. So that's one part of the human layer. The other part of the human layer, as you mentioned, is the curation. And for that, and like I know people like, oh, sorry, I know people. Sorry about that. Like people throw this word around, okay, curation, and we don't even use it anymore because it's so overused that it's almost like detrimental to what you're trying to say. But still, in its essence, this is what we're doing, okay? And it's probably the most fundamental chunk of the human layer in our product. And to us, curation, so the common sense of curation is like, okay, selecting stuff that's appropriate for a certain crowd, blah, blah, blah. For us, curation is one of the key things because it translates for our clients into time savings, okay? And the way it works for us is that we basically use our experience in what works and what doesn't work. And I'll give you a couple of examples, okay? Like in ads, if we're talking just about ads, like there's whole genres of music that from my 15 years experience have never been used ever in the ad space, okay? And I have nothing against these genres. I listen to that music all the time, but I mentioned like old time music. I don't remember doing like one single old time music sync in my whole career, okay? Metal is another one. I don't know if it's right or wrong, but jazz doesn't sync either, you know? So our job is to filter that out, okay? Like not not that we have like a metal and jazz filter, but we try to like focus on what sells. And what the effect of that, of just filtering what doesn't work, is that like every piece of music that's presented to our clients, regardless of what they're looking for, has some relevance in their work, okay? And that's major, okay? So we used to throw curation around, and everybody says that. But for us, curation only makes sense when you're actually saving time and you actually elicit that little warm and fuzzy feeling that the person or the product or the website or the library or whatever it is they're looking at understands them. So for us, it's a very, curation is not just like, oh, we have someone selecting good and bad music. That's not how it works. For us, curation is translating years and years and years and years of experience into time efficiencies and that warm and fuzzy feeling that the website understands me, you know?
Right,
so that's what curation is for us. So that's the human layer. So clearing the rights, doing the curation. Like if we could automate this, maybe we would, but at the moment for us, it's too important to be automated, and we're not really looking at automating that. We're automating tons of things that have less value, but these to us, it's an important contribution, you know, sort of encapsulating the experience into this curation to save time and all that stuff. So that's one layer. The other layer is the tech layer, which is it's another big chunk, obviously. And you mentioned taxonomies. So of course, there's all sorts of taxonomies, but these days we tend to go more in the direction of leveraging machine learning, and like we speak more in terms of, and it's kind of nerdy, but we speak more in terms of vectors than taxonomies these days. Like when we say taxonomy, for everyone to understand, we mean like tags, like styles of music, genres of music, moods of music, and that's sort of the classical way of sorting music for a search engine to be able to retrieve that. So we do have that, and that's important, and people are familiar with that way of searching. But in the background, we also have, I call them the vectors, and I won't go further into the nerdiness of it, but basically—
Would that be more natural language?
Well, there's a natural language component that makes like clusters of meanings. In the search engine, that's the part that tries to understand what you actually mean, you know, because people express themselves in different ways. So the natural language part is like making sense of that, okay, of what you actually mean. So that's one part of the tech layer. And another part is under— I'm doing air quotes here, understanding what's in the music itself, okay? Because you might use words to describe music. They might be accurate or not, and that's one of the problems we're facing, you know? Like your proficiency with musical terms highly influences the way you'll search for it, and we sort of have to kind of not ignore, but try to understand your meaning behind the actual words you're using to give you good results, you know? So that's the kind of things we're thinking about and working on with the natural language processing. And the machine learning part is really using the intrinsic properties of music to suggest you music that you like. And that's stuff we've built like internally, using like academic research and our people in the company to build this tech stack. So for us, the way we see this, we see this, like I mentioned, layers. There's a highly important human layer that provides all the expertise and all that, and on top of that, there's a tech layer that kind of makes sense of this, tries to automate a bunch of processes, and always with the same goal of like helping our clients find the music like really fast, like it's almost magical, you know? That's the words we're using, you know, like trying to make this, oh my God, how did it understand what we were looking for? That's like the sort of guiding light, you know? So we have all these tools, manual and tech related, that like try to get us to this point. And I think we're doing a good job at it, but it never ends, like the big challenge for us these days is to, like we're working with voice search, we're experimenting with that. We're experimenting with putting more features on mobile, which is another set of problems because mobile is so small and what we're trying to achieve is still kind of a complex task. So we're trying to squeeze more, but without making it confusing, so because you could always like pile up features and features and features, and all I'll do is like make you anxious about your work, because it'll be hard and difficult, and that's we try to steer clear of that as much as possible and keep it fun and warm and fuzzy.
Yeah. Well, I know in new and fast growing companies, it's often difficult to talk about specific roles or division of labor, especially amongst founders. But when you wear your product hat, is this primarily what you're thinking about? The usability, the scalability,
to me, it's like I realized like along the way that I was using what a lot of people refer to as design thinking. That's my framework for thinking about this, and like phase one of design thinking, and which to me is, well, they're all important, but phase one of design thinking is empathizing. So basically putting yourself into the other person's shoes, trying to understand where they're coming from, what do they want, and the minute you do that, it shields you from a lot of bad decisions, because it's very tempting as a product person to say, oh, this is so cool, everyone's got to have it. I gotta put it in their face. They have to use it because it's the best thing since sliced bread, But when I sort of turn the tables and see where they're coming from, what exactly the problem they're trying to solve, like it really like hardcore empathizing where they're coming from, it changes my priorities. It changes the way I look into something. So that's really the pair of glasses I'm wearing as a product person. And then like the rest of the design thinking process, if I sum it up, and I'm not an expert by any means, but it usually, the next steps are usually a series of iterations with testing, So that's interesting too, because the iteration and testing, what it's specifically trying, helping you to avoid is to think you have all the answers, build something very elaborate, very finished, and put it out there thinking you've solved all the problems, which it rarely works like that. So it keeps you humble in all of that. So you're empathizing to understand the problem, but the following series of iterations and testing helps you keep you in check. If you think you've solved everything and understood everything, well, it tells you, instead of building this very elaborate, complex thing and then launching it, try something simple, put it out there, see how people react, and iterate. So that's a very standard way of thinking these things. But from someone who's not from a product background, I'm from a music and business background, and it's kind of a new role to me. To me, those are the thing that helped me, stay humble and focused in this process.
Yeah. And how do you get at the empathy? Are you interviewing users? Are you just leveraging your 15 years of experience at Apollo? How do you get yourself into the point of view of the potential user?
Well, we feed off every piece of feedback that we get. So everything, like coming from the chat, from emails, everything we get, we take seriously, even the most like random, most there's not a piece of feedback that I won't look at seriously. And not to say that we'll do everything we're asked, that's not the idea, but we'll try to understand every piece of feedback that we get. We don't do as much interviews as we should, like we do it with like, and I think every product person would tell you that, but we do it in like critical phases of product development, but we could obviously do more always. The experience at this stage is almost dangerous, I would say, because there's strong bias that comes with the experience. So I think experience is paramount, like when you start something, because you can't just like test every freaking idea you come up with. Like you won't do anything, you know. At some point you have to commit to an idea and run with it. So I think that's what we've done for at least the first few phases. But at some point it could be a bias, and I've tried especially in Bopper, to surround myself with people from a different background, from different perspectives, that could challenge these things, because like there's not a week that comes by where I'm not like convinced that from my 15 years of experience in the ad business, we should do things this way. And then the next week I'm proving wrong by the data we get, you know, which is good, you know, it keeps you in check. So it's helpful when you don't know what to do, when you need to like make a decision with like very little information, which is what I found like as entrepreneurs, that I find that's the only thing I do well, you know, take decisions with very little, with bad information. But when you start getting good information, you're less needed, you know. So I tend to go, and I tend to wear those hats in the companies that I've been founded or been in or whatever. I tend to wear those hats where there's not enough good information and someone needs to make a call, you know. I gravitate towards these roles naturally.
Yeah, ambiguity, imperfect data. Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing your insights. I really appreciate the time that you've given today. It's really fascinating to talk with you, and I think you've talked about some universal truths in your path and your experience that I think people will enjoy hearing about. We'll make sure in the episode notes that we point people to Bopper so they can get some more firsthand information. But thank you, Phil. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Well, thanks for this time with you. That was a fun chat, man.
Thank you so much, Phil Messier and the team at Bopper. Thank you, Macy McCullum, for making this conversation happen. Thanks to Ant Taylor and the entire team at Light. If you're interested in what we're up to at Light, visit us at lyte.com. And thank you for listening to Spotlight On. We're available from Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, and wherever you like to get your podcasts from. While you're listening, please also leave a rating and a review. Thanks in advance. Keep your feedback coming. Reach me directly at lp@light.com. Thank you, be safe, and stay in touch.